Welcome to the Music Nut Program. I'm John. Thank you so much for joining me today as I reveal my top 10 favorite albums of 2000. In the community poll here on the Music Nut Program, I put in four choices. You can decide what my next choice would be to do a top 10 albums list. 1980 was the one that won the poll. I did a show a few weeks ago. 1970 finished second, and I did that show a week later. Some of you have been asking in the comments, so you're going to do a 2001. Here you go. Here is your show. Now, 2000, I don't have as many original albums from that year. I do have a lot more than 10, but I don't have like 60 or 70 or more like I did those other years that I did. But I was able to narrow this down to 10 more easily than 1980, 1970. The hardest part was putting the order in. I knew what my top three was off the top of my head, but the rest of the order was a little more difficult. I gave these a few more listens. So this is my top 10 from 2000. Disclaimer, 2000, I was listening to a lot of jazz music. I was going back to albums from the past that I had missed before and artists as well. I was taking a lot of classical piano lessons at that time too. So I wasn't really big into what was going on in 2000, although a couple of these albums I bought when they first came out. Some of them I bought a little bit later. And this first one I'm going to talk about, I picked up last year after Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation introduced me to this band, The Hives, Veni Vidi Vicious. Who are The Hives? For those of you who don't know who they are, a lot of you probably do. I was just behind the times at that point. This is garage rock revival. Think of the Sonics from the 1960s, that spirit, along with the occasional hooks and craftsmanship of Paul Revere and the Raiders. Saying occasional because I don't think they quite have those kind of hooks, although a few songs on here are really catchy. But this is a very solid album. 12 songs, 28 minutes, comes in, kicks your ass, and gets out. I like to say that. The singles on here were Main Offender and Hate to Say I Told You So. These are the strongest tracks. But Knock Knock, Supply and Demand, Die All Right, Declare Guerre, Nuclear, all very, very solid to strong. We got a cover of Find Another Girl here. Very interesting. This was a 1961 track written by Jerry Butler and Curtis Mayfield, and Jerry Butler recorded it as a solo song. And I'm not going to say that the Hives version is as good as the original, but it has that same spirit. All told, if you want something that comes in, great, that just comes in, kicks your butt, this is a good album. And I have a few more of their albums as well. It's the Hives, Veni Vidi Vicious, my number 10. Number 9. Now, this band, a lot of you out there may know more for the album before that because it gave us the number one rock song of 1998 here in the States. And it gave us four big radio hits. This album did not have that same fate. This will be an album after album that I will talk about in the near future. This is the Wallflowers and Breach. Now, how is this album? Well, if you go back to my album after show on Blues Traveler Straight On Till Morning, I compare it to Four, their breakthrough album, and the fact that the songs are just as strong. They just don't have the hit singles on it, and maybe not as many hooks. That's this album too. The single is Sleepwalker. Sleepwalker should have been all over the radio. I don't know why it wasn't. It is a great song, great chorus, great bridge, great hook to it. Letters from the Wasteland, which is the opening track, has that same spirit of One Headlight, which was the biggest rock song in 1988 here. It has been the fact that it has that bass line, it's very prominent in it. Same spirit, same feel. Other great songs on here that rock are Some Flowers Bloom Dead and Murder 101. Songs like Witness, Up From Under, Birdcage, they're more reflective, but Jacob Dylan, excellent songwriter. I mean, he's continuing to perfect his craft on this album. Maybe this didn't sell. It only went gold. Bringing Down a Horse went platinum several times over, but this is my number 9 from 2000, Reach. Number 8. This is a legacy band who are getting a lot more sporadic with their original albums at this point. This was their first album in 5 years, and it was a homecoming for their original main songwriter, Kerry Livgren. He also had Robbie Steinhardt back in the band on violin. This is Kansas with the album Somewhere to Elsewhere. Here we're going back to the prog rock of their good old days from their self-titled debut till Point of No Return. This can sit proudly next to those albums, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's quite as good as Left Overture and Point of No Return, but it's close. We got great prog rock songs here. Icarus 2, which is the sequel to Icarus Born on the Wings of Steel. I think it's actually a little better than that original track. When the World Was Young is excellent. Myriad is another great prog rock track. We got Disappearing Skin Tight Blues, which starts out with violin, then it becomes a blues rock number, which is really cool. Byzantium, there's a lot of class with that song. Grand Finale, we're going more funk rock on there. But this is a very strong album. It may not have sold, but it did continue the legacy of great albums by Kansas. It's my number 8, Somewhere to Elsewhere. If you'd like to read more about this album, as well as read some of my commentaries on this album, our friend Tim Derling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions wrote this album. This is the Kansas album review. Let it be your guide. I am featured on 4 albums in this book. Everybody on this that was featured here, this is a panel book. There's a different panel of us that talk about a different album, and he goes through the entire discography here. It's very well done, but you will see my commentary on 4 albums in here. I'm listed under my real name, John Alapic. So highly recommend this if you have a Kansas fan in your life, in your family. This would be a great gift for them if they're a Kansas fan. So there you go. That's available on Amazon on demand. Number 7. Now, this is one of my favorite artists of my lifetime. I have nearly everything he's done. And at this point, I think he was going through a real strong creative renaissance. And I believe it started on 1989's album, New York. And that was the album that was my gateway into Lou Reed. And this is Ecstasy from 2000. Probably his hardest rocking album, but there's still a lot of different moods and textures on it. The guitars are louder on here than any other album. That I will give you. Paranoia Key of E is a strong opener. Mystic Child is very catchy. The title track, Ecstasy, is a little more reflective. Same thing with Modern Dance. Tatters brings in the horns, very elegant. Much like some of the songs you'd have on Set the Twilight Reeling there. There were a lot of horns on there, but a lot of loud guitars as well. Future Farmers of America rocks like hell, as does White Prism. Rock Minuet's really cool. Like a Possum's clocks in around 19 minutes. It was his attempt at like a Sister Ray, but not quite as rocking, just more about feel and mood. And it's okay for a little while, but you know, it does get repetitive after a while. Big Sky's a good closer. You ever heard this album? If you're a Lou Reed fan, definitely check it out. Especially if you like Lou Reed's guitar playing, his harder rocking sound. This is Ecstasy. This is my number 7. Number 6, this is an artist, I didn't get into him when he was in Black Flag. I got into him when he formed his own band, which was more rock, but it had a lot of jazz elements to it. But there's no jazz elements to this. This is Rollins' band, Get Some Go Again. This has the spirit of punk, but it's a rock album. He's got Mother Superior backing him at this time. Illumination was the single. This song is killer. It's got a slow burn before it goes into that main verse or the main chorus. Excellent. Get Some Go Again just grabs you by the throat. Monster's really heavy. Love So Heavy as the bass line's really up in the mix, and he's playing with a pick, so you could really hear them. Thinking Cap is great. I Go Dayglow is awesome. Are You Ready? That is a cover of Thin Lizzy's song, originally released on Live and Dangerous. You Let Yourself Down, Brother Interior, so many great songs on here. Hard hitting album. It doesn't have that sense of space that you'd hear on Wait or End of Silence or Come In and Burn. But if you want something that just kicks your ass, Get Some Go Again is the album for you. It's a little harder to find these days, but if you can get your hands on it at a reasonable price, I highly recommend it. That is my number 6. Number 5, my favorite band. Little Feat, who I will be talking about at great length on this channel in the near future. This is their 2000 album, Chinese Work Songs. This would be the third of 4 albums they would do with Sean Murphy on lead vocals. In my humble opinion, this is the best of those 4 albums, even with the fact that we have 4 cover songs on here, and 3 of them they play it straight on, like Rag Mama Rag. We all know that's the band's song from their second self-titled album. Sample in a Jar was from Phish's breakthrough album in the US called Hoist. That was like the only time they really got on album-oriented rock radio. Gimme a Stone is a track by the Hooters, and It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry. Now that's Bob Dylan's song from Highway 61 Revisited originally. That song they turn into a slow blues. And Sean's vocals on this shine like the sun. I've seen them do this live with Sean, and she's just knocks it out of the park vocally on here. The originals are great though too. Bed of Roses rocks really hard. That's a Sean vocal. If you ever hear Sean, if you don't know Sean Murphy's vocal, she sounds a lot like Bonnie Raitt's, but maybe she's got a little more gusto to her voice. She sings with more enthusiasm. Just Another Sunday. This is a duet between Bill Payne and Sean. That another strong song. Marginal Creatures is excellent. This is a great Paul Barrere song, as is the title song. The title song kills. Musically, lyrically, it just hits hard. Eula's a very cool tune. It's got more of a New Orleans feel in the tradition of the old Little Feat. Very strong album. Didn't sell, but and it's a little long, but a lot of albums from 2000 were long. Some of these albums I'm talking about, some of these are clocking in around the hour mark, but it just was the way it was in 2000. But I highly recommend this album if you like Little Feat and you're not as familiar with the Sean Murphy's years. This is definitely a great place to start if you want to get into those albums. Chinese Work Songs by Little Feat is my number 5. Number 4, this is an album. It's very critically acclaimed, and it's a grower. You got to listen to this many times to get into it. And I had the albums before I picked this up. And I bought this as a new release. This is Radiohead's Kid A. A lot of critics consider this their masterpiece, #1 album of 2000 according to Best Ever Albums, but it's a slow burn. You had hints of what was to come on OK Computer, but this is something that you have to listen to in full. You're not going to hear hooks on here. You're not going to hear hit singles, but there are repetitive rhythms that stick into your brain, like the national anthem. You got a great instrumental in Tree Fingers. Not a lot of guitar on here, but Optimistic has plenty of it. That is a killer track. Is Idioteque. Idioteque might be the most famous song off the album. Everything in its right, well, outside of everything in its right place, which is a beautiful song. Tom York's vocals on here are stunning. Morning Bell, motion picture soundtrack. Everything on here is very strong, but you have to listen to it as a piece and listen to it repeatedly in order for the songs, the textures, the soundscapes, the movements to stick in your brain. So this is my number 4, Radiohead's Kid A. Number 3, another one of my favorite bands. This isn't most fans' favorite album by Little Feat. As a matter of fact, when I met King's X, Welcome Home or Please Come Home, Mr. Bulbous, I met King's X and I congratulated Doug Pinnick on this album. And he goes, "Hey, thank you very much." A lot of fans say this is our worst album. And then Ty Tabor, he's there and he's listening. He goes, "Yeah, that or Manic Moonlight." Manic Moonlight I like a lot. This I love. This is heavier album. It's very Beatles-esque, but it's almost like Beatles meets Black Sabbath, and very strong album. The harmonies on here are just as strong as they were on those first few albums with Atlantic. I think the songs are just as strong. Now, at this point, they're on Metal Blade, so they're not going to get that same push. But I love Julia. She's Gone Away is really heavy and very cool. Marshmallow Field, we got a great soft into loud thing going on this song. This is very cool. When You're Scared is really haunting. Charlie Sheen is led by that cool bass line and those jangly guitars. This is a really cool tune. Bittersweet is more reflective. That's a short song by Ty Tabor. Move Me is the Hey Jude of the album. It's got this very memorable, repetitive verse to it and chorus. And they repeat that ending on Move Me Part 2, which is like a 4-minute ending to the original song. But it's like Hey Jude would be. If I said Let It Be before, I'm sorry. It's Hey Jude. But this is a really cool album, and it doesn't really get a lot of recognition, in my opinion. It's probably my 4th favorite album by King's X. And this is my number 3, Please Come Home, Mr. Bulbous. Another band who should always keep the original logo. Their original logo kicked ass. And they're back to that again. But during these years when they weren't as popular, they were playing around with their logo, but that's another story. Number 2. Now, this album was this duo's first album in 20 years. You already know where I'm going. And it won a shitload of Grammys when they should have been winning a bunch of Grammys in the 70s, but the competition was a lot more fierce back then. And Stevie Wonder was out there then. Steely Dan, Two Against Nature. They continue the craftsmanship. This could have easily been released in 1982 or 83 after Gaucho. It's like they weren't paying attention to what was going on. They just kept doing their thing. Very well recorded, just like all their other albums. Cousin Dupree was the single. It wasn't too popular. It got played a lot on AOR. It's not even close to my favorite song on here, and I like everything on here. What a Shame About Me. I think I played a little bit. Gaslighting Abbey is a great track. If you like what came before, you'll like this. The horn lines are there. There's still that light funk, that strong sense of craftsmanship, those excellent harmonies, those cryptic lyrics. Great songs on here. I think Jack of Speed, the horn lines on there, it's a die for. Janie Runaway is very cool. Negative Girls, a little, well, it's more of a negative song lyrically, but it's got more of that kind of feel. It's more reflective. West of Hollywood is a outstanding closer. Everything on here, I think, is very good. If you like what Steely Dan did before this, you'll also like Two Against Nature. This is an excellent album. And there are albums by Steely Dan and I do like more, but this is very strong. And this is my number 2. Okay, my number 1 is an artist I didn't get into until I was about 40, and I'm 53 now. When I was younger, I wasn't really into singer-songwriters. I wasn't into Americana music. Then I start listening to lyrics and I start listening to song stretches. I get older and get a little more wiser, I think. John Hiatt, Crossing Muddy Waters, is my number one. I have all of his albums but one at this point. I will be talking about John Hiatt in the future. If you ever saw comments about John Hiatt on Sea of Tranquility when it was talking about best albums from a particular year, that was me. This is the album where a lot of people say John Hiatt went bluegrass. It's not a bluegrass album. It's just bluegrass elements because you got a mandolin and pedal steel on this album, and you don't have a drummer on it. It has that kind of feel, but you don't hear all these fiddles going on or anything. There's a wonderful sense of craftsmanship on here. And John's voice is in fine form. Lincoln Town is excellent. A lot of these songs are about relationships that fell apart, such as the title track, What Do We Do Now, God's Golden Eyes. Some of these songs are reflective, but we have stuff that's more upbeats, like Gone, Before I Go. Mr. Stanley is very haunting. Lift Up Every Stone is one of my 5 favorite songs by John Hiatt. Fantastic. It has a gospel feel. It's one that he does live. I've seen him do it live. Magnificent song. Only the Song Survives is excellent. Top to bottom, fantastic album. This is probably one of 8 albums by John Hiatt I would give a 10 out of 10 to. Love this album to death. So this is my number one, Crossing Muddy Waters by John Hiatt. So let's get to the honorables. There'll be some more glare because I'll be reading from a list, but I do have to mention this artist, another one of my favorites, and I'm probably the only one that mentioned this in comments on Sea of Tranquility too, and the Contrarians. Chris Whitley put out Perfect Day this year in 2000 with Billy Martin and Chris Wood from Medeski, Martin and Wood on accompaniment. This is a covers album, and he makes all these songs his own. There's a few songs on here you'd know, like Drifting from Jimi Hendrix, and For a Time Around by Bob Dylan, Spoonful, which was Willie Dixon. It's been covered so many times. Crystal Ship by The Doors. His version of Lou Reed's Perfect Day is wonderful. But what's really cool on here is there songs that you really don't know the originals for, like China Gate and Wild Ox Moan. Excellent tracks. This is very good. This is definitely an honorable. I didn't want to put it in my top 10 because it was a covers album, but it's very, very well done. I like everything Chris Whitley's done. And like John Hiatt, a lot of those would be in my top 10. So let me get my list up here. Yes, there will be some glare. Let me grab that. My honorables here. All right. A shout out to Peter Jones. He introduced me to Halford earlier this year. Resurrection is in my honorables. He introduced me to that album. And yes, it is a kick-ass heavy metal album. Fishbone, another one of my favorite bands, put out the Psychotic Friends Nutworks that year. I think that was a strong comeback for them after their previous 2 albums, which were kind of hit and miss. Another album that Doug Pinnick played on, Supershine, self-titled debut. That probably would have ranked higher for me if I had more time with it. I actually never bought that album until this year. U2 put out All That You Can't Leave Behind. Now, not high on the album. I thought the singles were outstanding. And that's the heart of the album. The rest of the album, I think, is kind of hit and miss. But, it's pretty good. I like all the work up through Row and Hum more, though. That I'll tell you. Dandy Warhol's 13 Tales of Urban Bohemia. Another strong track. Bohemian Like You should have been all over the radio. That was fantastic single. All you Rush fans out there, which I am, Geddy Lee, My Favorite Headache. That was a very strong album. Iron Maiden's comeback album with Bruce Dickinson back on vocals Brave New World, also very good. Fuel, Something Like Human. You'd probably know Fuel for that huge #1 rock song, Hemorrhage in My Hands. Excellent track, but rest of the album's pretty good too. And Meat Puppets put out an album, Golden Lies, in 2000, which I like a lot. That was their first album in 5 years. So there you go with the honorables. So, what are your favorite albums from 2000? Do you know these albums that I just talked about? Do you like these albums? Do you like my honorables more? Is there something that I missed? Please let me know in the comments. I will be putting this out shortly. On November 25th, I will be on Grant's Rock Warehouse, where we will talk about our top 10 songs from 1986. We'll have a full panel on. We will be live. This will be on shortly after I do the premiere for this show. Also, on My Music Corner, John Clauser and I are continuing to review the Accept studio albums. The episode for their next album, Stalingrad, will be coming out on Wednesday, November 27. Our guest will be Jack Toledano from the YouTube channel All or Nada, according to Jack. Also, I will be putting out an album after episode in the next day or two. It's going to be on this album, and I am going to film this episode shortly. It's going to be Alanis Morissette, supposed former infatuation junkie. Very strong album that a lot of people don't know about. They all know Jagged Little Pill. The album after is very strong too, but just different and experimental. So, also, this coming Thursday, November 28th, I will be continuing the It's Thin Lizzy Thursday series here on a Music Nut program. I will be discussing Thin Lizzy's 9th album, Black Rose, a rock legend. So, thank you all so much for joining me today. Do what you love, and I'll talk to you soon.